Hello, everyone, and welcome to the final Dojo Live show of the week, this Thursday, November 17th, 2022. My name is Kim Lantis, and it's my pleasure to be hosting along today with Jorge Hernandez. Jorge, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for inviting me, Kim. It's always a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. It's going to be a fun one. And of course, the guest of today's show, the most important person joining us today, is Joseph Schneier, who is the CEO and co-founder of Trusty.care. Joseph, thank you so much for spending your time with us today and, of course, sharing your knowledge with us today.
I'm so glad to be here.
Yes, it's going to be a great conversation. I'm a bit jealous. Joseph is in Las Vegas, so he's got good food and all that jazz. But he's ready to go home, I guess. You frequent Vegas too often with work, I hear.
Well, just enough.
All right. So those of you who are wondering, what are we going to be talking about today? We're going to be talking about the surprising things Joseph and Trusty.care have learned about how healthcare works, something that is incredibly relevant, I think, to all of us. But before we get there, we really would like to get to know you a bit better. Joseph, if you could share a bit about your personal story, your passions, and what's kind of led up to Trusty.care. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, great. So glad to be here. I've been running Trusty.care for 4 years, but I've been running technology companies since 2003. So for a very long time, just about 20 years. And I got into this line of business of working in the healthcare space in a little bit of a roundabout pathway. I had been running companies in the educational technology sector. We were building out products that were helping people who didn't believe that they could learn something to realize that they could actually learn that subject and incorporate that learning into their life. So just a few quick examples were things like, how do you convince an American that they can learn a foreign language and have them learn that language, which is
that's so empowering.
Yeah, it was interesting. And a lot of people feel like it's not possible, but people all over the world learn foreign languages. And so about, let's see, in 2006 or so, some behavioral research scientists came to me and said, you're doing all this work in education. I wonder if we couldn't apply some of what you're doing to patient behavioral change, which I didn't really have any experience in the healthcare sector at the time, but I said, why not? Let's give it a shot. And so we started testing out things like, how do you take a population that's maybe a complex population and that is, maybe not being adherent with their medications, or we worked with youth who weren't being honest with their doctors about how much alcohol they consumed, a variety of different subjects. And how do you get them to change that behavior in a way that was going to benefit their health? So I sort of dropped in the deep end of the healthcare pool at the time. And then I started Trusty.care after having spent all this time in healthcare. And then I had a personal event happen that really was the impetus to get this company going. My younger brother, who's just a year younger than me, got into a car accident, pretty severe car accident. And I got a call, at night. I flew in the next morning, and he had ridden into a brick wall at 50 miles per hour. So it's really intense. And I'm sitting in the ICU with him, and the surgeon comes into the room, and he was like, we're going to have to figure out how to get your brother out of the hospital because he doesn't have any health insurance. And that was what first of all, I was like, this is not your job. Like, what are you doing? You're the surgeon. So, but secondly, like I was an empowered a person who understood how the healthcare system worked to some extent at the time. I could be pretty pushy, and it was still incredibly difficult to figure out how to get his healthcare covered, get him on some kind of insurance, make sure that it didn't bankrupt our entire family. And so that was why we started Trusty.care. I realized that there was so much complexity in the system, and that my brother had me and some of my family at the table helping him, but most families don't have that. They're in that situation. They don't understand how healthcare works. They don't have somebody who's advocating for them. So that's why we got the company started.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for sharing that very powerful personal story. And you're right. I think most individuals in a situation like yours and your families would be, as we say, up crap creek without a paddle, right? And I think how cool of you to be able to take that experience and shift it and be like, hey, this is a reality. We got lucky, but most people don't. Let's see what we can do about it. So tell me exactly what Trusty.care is doing, and what we have an idea now of the problem that you're solving, but how are you going about solving it?
Yeah, so this sort of leads into why I wanted to talk a little bit about this topic of the surprising things about healthcare. So we started the company initially thinking we were going to create a platform for consumers to help them to understand how to pick the right health insurance product. And we jumped in sort of thinking like we'd be able to solve that really quickly. We put up a website online, my co-founder and I, that was helping to distill different types of health insurance. And in a week, the government in New York City shut our website down and said, you can't do this. And it was this first moment of being like, well, this is going to be a lot more complex than what we realized. And that got us into what we ended up actually doing. So what we realized was it's difficult for consumers to pick the right health insurance product and to navigate health insurance. And I think most of us think that's because intentionally health insurers are making it complex. And what we found as we got into this industry was actually it's complex for almost everybody in the industry themselves too. And there's just a lot of messiness of systems that the health insurers are working with that end up at the end of the day hurting consumers, but are also difficult for the health insurer themselves. So we built out a platform that we sell to a health insurer, and it helps them to get in the right type of member that is a good fit for their plan so that they can actually cover them properly. And then we provide the member with tools to understand how to use their plan correctly in ways that can help them to save money and get better access to healthcare. But our customers ended up being the health insurer in the end.
Which is kind of ironic, right? I think it makes a lot of sense though, because it makes perfect sense, at least even just from a business standpoint, because you've got the provider who's actually the one who's interested. I think this is their bread and butter, and if you can make it easier for them, then the consequence of that is that the people who can then benefit, right? It's sort of like the Tinder of health insurance. There's this matching, right? Like, hey, this is what we offer. Hey, you fit. Like,
yeah.
I love it. So, go ahead, Jorge.
Joseph, where do you think all this complexity comes from? Because from the sounds of it, it's like totally unintentional, and even people who spent their entire lives working on this are like, okay, this is really like we're in the weeds. So where do you think that comes from? How did we get here?
Yeah, well, I think it's a bit of a misnomer when we say healthcare or the healthcare system, because the healthcare system is hundreds and hundreds of systems that work together. And so part of the complexity is that we talk about this as if it's one thing when it's lots of things that need to work together in a coordinated fashion. And healthcare is complicated in a lot of places. I think most Americans tend to think that overseas, everything's super simple, everything's free and wonderful and perfect, and only America is it a problem. But actually, in most countries, you're going to have some challenges related to healthcare because healthcare is complex. It's expensive. It's involves lots of different constituents. And how we got here in America is kind of an interesting story. But I think the main thing to note is just healthcare itself is where people's fears and challenges are meeting up with systems, and that's that can be difficult to navigate. And in the U.S., it's interesting. We sort of took a different pathway than a lot of other countries, and how people think about healthcare in the U.S. is they usually think about I have an employer, I get my health insurance through them, and that's how healthcare works in America. And there's been a lot of talk of we need to change all of that. But I think one of the things that's been the most surprising about the work we do is that we realize that about 150 million Americans get their health care and health insurance in almost the same way as most of the world, publicly funded, either through Medicare, Medicaid, some kind of like marketplace type of plan. And the way that part of the healthcare system works in the US is actually very similar to lots of other countries. So that was another really surprising thing, is that there's like a lot of people in America that get healthcare in a similar way to other countries. It still is complex for them, but it's more similar than different. So.
Yeah. Are those 150 million? I mean, presumably this is mostly older individuals in the United States. Is that your focus at Trusty.care? Like, and how does this work in that sense?
Yeah. So, just maybe take a step back, sort of definitionally. There are three main categories of people who get healthcare that is, I guess, four that is associated with the government. So you have older adults, 10,000 new people who are getting healthcare as an older adult every single day. So it's a lot of people. You have lower income people who are getting their insurance through like a Medicaid. You have people who are self-employed or work at a small business and they get their insurance through like Obamacare, so marketplace type of plan. And then obviously people who are in the military or defense who are getting their insurance through the government as well. So together, this makes up a large percentage of people in the U.S., of citizens in the U.S. Yeah.
Thank you. And so how does your platform work? I know this is geared toward the provider itself, and then ultimately the patient or the insured is the one who's benefiting. But what does the dynamic look like? What is it exactly that a provider can expect, and what's the matching?
Yeah. So let's say you're turning 65 and you need to get health insurance through Medicare. So that's the portion that's for older adults. And that is still our primary focus, although we work with these other populations as well. So, if you were, Kim, turning 65, I'm sure you would wake up one day and you'd think like, okay, now what? You wouldn't suddenly magically understand how to get Medicare or even know that it's Medicare or Medicaid. It all sounds very confusing to people. So what normally happens is people go online, they start searching around, they get confused, and they end up with some kind of broker that helps them to figure out what type of health insurance to get. And about 80% of people who are purchasing health insurance are getting it through a broker. And that broker could be somebody who works for a health insurance company or they work independently. So there's different ways. So our platform, we sell both to health insurance brokers and directly to a health insurance company. And it's used by those sales agents, those brokers, like kind of a CRM. You're right, kind of like Tinder, like a matching system to help that broker to connect an individual with the right health insurance product. So they live and breathe in it like Salesforce. They're using it for their day-to-day business. And then the platform does lots of different things to also help the sales process. But the primary interaction the consumer has is with this broker. And then we're sort of sitting in the background assisting the system to help that individual. So
In that sense, is it also helping create like a sense of specialization? Like me as a broker, like I know the ins and outs of this sector, of this state, of these medical conditions, and then alternatively, not only are they better at what they're doing, but then offering that better care to their buyer. What are we called here? Buyers, patients. Like,
yeah. People call them either their clients or their members, but in this circumstance, that's what they usually call them. Yeah.
Okay, but are they able to then hone in on that specialization and then just do what they're doing better as well?
Yeah. So they're able to focus on making sure that like they collect all the right information on the individual, and then the system itself is identifying what's important for that individual with the different health insurance products. So like, and it can be things that people don't know about. So you may think like, oh, I always want to go to a Walgreens or CVS because it's on the corner by my house and that's where I always want to go. But it could be with your health conditions that the best health insurance plan for you to get, that pharmacy is not in network for you. And so if you kept going to that pharmacy, you'd end up spending a lot more money, which most people don't know, like that when you get insurance, you're supposed to go to a specific pharmacy that's associated with your insurance. And so it's that kind of thing where we try to take into account, what are your preferences? Like, are you going to not pick up your medications? So you should find a health insurance plan that allows you to go to that pharmacy, or does it matter more that you get your medications covered in a cost-effective way? So you should get this other health insurance plan and go to a different pharmacy. So it helps to really personalize and tease out what's important for you as an individual, and helps that broker to do that in an easy way so that they're not spending an eternity trying to make that happen.
Cool. I actually have a question. It's coming back to like the individual side. And I think just the overwhelming nature that you mentioned about healthcare in the United States. My personal story, I think we shared this a bit pre-show. And I think I've mentioned it on the show before, but my mom actually ended up passing away about 1.5 years ago. It was a whole strange thing. Thank you. We think it was related to strokes and whatnot, but she did have, and I'm not even sure which one it was, to be honest, Medicare, Medicaid. She lived in the state of Arizona. When her health started to kind of decline, my sister and I and my brother, we opted for her to go with my sister, who's a registered nurse, to the state of Wyoming, where she could, be with my sister and start this discovery process of what's happening. And little did we know that my mom's particular policy was more specific to the state of Arizona. She wasn't yet covered in Wyoming. And so there had to be this whole shift and change. And then, of course, that ended up taking, several weeks, a month, which impacted, I think, the quality of care that she may have been able to receive within that time frame. So as individuals and insurance policy holders, like, is Trusty.care able to help navigate those types of waters, or is it the broker or who's coming in and saying this will be helpful, or is it both? Who's getting alerted on perhaps these questions that we don't even know to ask?
Right. Yeah, we mostly are empowering the broker to communicate that more clearly to the consumer. So for instance, when your mom was purchasing, I'm assuming Medicare. So a lot of people don't realize this. When you get Medicare, it's not like you're getting it directly from the government. It still is, you're getting it through like an Aetna or Cigna that is managing your insurance on behalf of the government. And there's different types of Medicare you can get. And there's one kind you can get where you could go to a doctor anywhere in the country. So it wouldn't have mattered at all. If you had moved from Arizona to Wyoming, your insurance would have just been able to cover everything wherever you were. And then there's some types of Medicare that are really like much more local to where you live. And it's important to know, which kind you get. And for the broker in that circumstance, it would have been good for them to know, like, this patient has this type of insurance, and if they need to move, here are the things we're going to need to do in advance. Here are some ways we could potentially accelerate the process for them when they arrive. Here are some things we could get started ahead of time, so that there wasn't that gap. And there probably were things that could have been done if your mom had the right assistance at the time.
Yeah, thank you. So let's talk about the empowerment of the brokers themselves then, or how you go about building your network within Trusty.care. Obviously, it's very, I can hear and I can sense that it's very important that you're creating a network of people who genuinely care, right? So what does that look like in terms of you building your partners and who's utilizing Trusty.care?
It is important for us that our customers can do their jobs well. I wish I could say that all of them really care, but what they really care a lot about is selling insurance. What we care about is making sure that they do that in a way that really benefits the consumer. So we have to always balance, like, as a business, what are the needs of our customer, which is like they want to run their business with what are the needs and like what is the mission of the company, which is to make sure that these individuals don't go bankrupt because of their out-of-pocket healthcare costs. And so the way that we do that balance is that we've developed this system that makes it really simple and easy for them to make good choices on behalf of their customers. And building a network, there are hundreds of thousands of people, of brokers that do this work. And we sell to them, but then we also sell to health insurers that, and they provide the tool for their internal sales agents as well. So it's a combination of selling to like this large group of individuals out there who are out there running their small businesses, and then also to these large health insurers that also go direct to consumer in their sales.
Thank you. Thank you. I think real quick, we're going to be touching on you again as an individual, some of your lessons learned, words of wisdom, company culture here at Trusty.care. Before we do, Jorge, any final questions you might have as it's related to something surprising that Joseph has learned in his healthcare experience?
Yeah, so we touched a little bit on what it's like for seniors, but what is it like for the rest of us, those who haven't gotten to that stage of our lives? And I'm particularly thinking about groups where the medical community hasn't been always serving them well. Starting with women, but most people probably don't know, but most procedures and medicine gets tested on men.
Yeah.
So it's not always what women need. So there is something that, it's failing women. But there are other people like the LGBTQ plus community. There are other people like, as you said, people who have just, who've lost their job, who don't have that easy way of navigating the system because they are part of an underserved or minority community. So what have you learned about the system that could help those people, and how is Trusty.care, how does Trusty.care come into that?
Well, some of what we can do to help is also working with the government and moving policy. So there's been a big move across the country from the federal government and a state basis to move towards a different way of paying doctors and insurers. And this sounds a little weedsy, but the briefest overview, instead of paying a doctor for each time they perform a procedure, they're paying them a sum of money to manage an individual over the course of a year. And the reason why this is relevant is now they really need to do well for each of their patients. Woman, man, doesn't matter. If they want to be having a profit in their business, it requires them to actually serve their patients better, which is exciting. So this is a move, what they call moving towards value-based care. And I think it's going to have a really profound impact over the next couple decades on the U.S. healthcare system. There's also been a lot of really exciting things coming out recently of startups that are focusing specifically on things like women of color, or mortality rates of pregnant women in the U.S. That are women of color. And that's been exciting to see that venture funds are starting to fund those types of companies. I'm really hopeful that type of work will continue. And then specifically, what we do is we really make sure we get the right profile of the individual and understand what really matters to them and what their challenges are, so that the information they're getting from us is clear and easy to understand. It's not filled with like tons of jargon that you're not going to be able to understand. And that helps somebody if they're low income, if they're a woman, if they're LGBTQ. It's really just the distillation of like, what are the things that are important to you as a patient in your interactions with the healthcare system.
That's really great. The value-based care concept, it seems so obvious, but it's absolutely revolutionary to me right now. I'm embarrassed to admit that.
You should.
So Joseph, let's kind of bring it back to you. I think in terms of a company leader and co-founding Trusty.care, some of your lessons learned in terms of what would you maybe counsel other leaders to do? What's worked out well for you? Maybe something that you've done that hasn't quite worked out well, and they could learn from you rather than repeating the same mistake.
I think one of the things that I wish if I could go back in time and tell myself as a younger person is that there's no amount of competence in an individual that is going to matter more than like if they are also like toxic to your culture. So it's really important to recognize that just because somebody maybe is the best salesperson or the best coder, if they are causing a lot of harm to the culture, it's going to end up costing the company financially in the long run. And every time I've made that mistake, have I have regretted it, and I wish I would be smart enough to not make it again. So that's one thing is like, don't be afraid to stick by the culture that you're building and to build a good place for people where people feel welcome, and to try to address any kind of toxicity as quickly as possible.
I think that's really key. Any tips on how you've kind of gone about addressing that, maybe for those who says, yeah, but that's scary, right? That's easier said than done. What methods or processes have you used in your approach that have worked out well?
I think that the first thing is really communicating the values of the company to everybody from day one. So we've tried to create a culture that is really diverse, and we look at diversity across lots of different lines, both from like, what are your religious background? Were you born in the U.S.? What's your education level? Also, obviously, race, class, all these different things. But we put that out in the interview process to make sure that people are comfortable with that. And if we see any hesitancy around any of those areas, then we know they're probably not going to work out well with us. And so sort of using your values as the filter to hold yourself accountable to what you're trying to build culture wise. So if we see somebody is like just not jiving with the values of the company, we're just probably not a good fit for them, So yeah, and trusting that you've created values for a reason, and it's for their benefit as much as for yours. So
I love that. I'm also curious, as we were leading into today's show, it actually reminded me of a past guest that we had here on Dojo Live, Dan Shapiro of Glowforge. And this came out, like one of the things that his company is doing and talking about health insurance is they publish their health insurance policy on their careers page. It's absolutely transparent. It's available to anyone who might, have a pre-existing condition and wondering, am I covered? Is this going to help in my career choice? Perhaps those who are transgender and going through transitions, women's healthcare in terms of how they're able to support with different types of birth control methods or even travel and abortion. And I thought that was really awesome, like this level of transparency to bring forward at the beginning. Like you're saying, at the very beginning of this engagement, not just for you as a company, well, do they fit? Does this individual fit with us? But for the individual, do I fit? Is this going to be a smart move for me? What else, or what kind of approaches maybe is Trusty.care taking in that similar way of discovery, of transparency? What are those key components of your culture?
Yeah, for us, a couple of different things. So it's really important for us that our company is reflecting the what America looks like. So we made a commitment from the very beginning that we weren't going to skew ourselves in like we're only hiring Democrats, or only hiring people from the coast, or like anything along those lines. But what we've wanted to create is a safe space where no matter where you're coming from, if your interest is in improving the U.S. healthcare system, and you're committed to that, then you have a place here. And we have over 50% female employees. at least 30% are immigrants. It's probably a good split between half of the company that went to an Ivy League school and half the company that has a high school education. And we're really are committed to making that clear to people. So then when people show up to interview with us, when they look across, they see themselves there. There's not, you're not going to come and be from some background where you're thinking like there's no place for me at this company. And I think that's been a key piece for us, and building that in from the beginning. So startups, I think, often wait to do that later on. They're like, well, we'll do that, address that further down the road. And we just said, well, we're going to try and do this from the very beginning. And I think it's made a real difference.
I think that's awesome. And especially in healthcare, because you asked this question of what does America look like? And there's so much that goes into that rather than this, idyllic picture that we're supposed to come to our mind. And to have this variety and this genuinely diverse group of individuals trying to attack healthcare, you're going to be able to, of course, cover all facets of healthcare that maybe you wouldn't even have thought of before in the conversation, because someone can step up and say, that's not my experience. Right. And so have you seen that kind of play out in terms of where your vision as a company is headed, like in terms of, stepping out of the United States into more of like an international sector? What have you seen those types of conversations?
Yeah. No, it's given us a really good feel for like, what is the experience of somebody who is trying to navigate healthcare if they live in Tennessee or in Florida, or if they're coming here and they need a visa to be able to work here, how does that affect things? And it really has helped to give us insight into what are the different possible challenges that our end users, which are the consumers, could be facing as they navigate the health system. And then internationally, we've built the company to be able to go international, and we've spent a lot of time looking at where there are comparable countries that have similar challenges that the U.S. has in healthcare navigation. And it could be that it's the navigation is not because it's a cost reason. It could be that it's just hard to figure it out. Or so we are not going to go international this year, but we definitely anticipate within the next 3 or 4 years to be in a couple of other countries.
That's really amazing. I think starting at the beginning with the end in mind is one of those things that you did right as a founder. Yeah. Perfect. Well, we are actually at the end. I've gone past a little bit, actually, if you can believe it or not, our half hour today. Joseph, it has been a true pleasure learning from you today. Thank you for sharing all about Trusty.care with us. Jorge, of course, thank you for joining me as well. Wish you all nothing but success as we move forward. Stick around just a minute as we're going to go off air. But viewers, I would like to remind you that on Monday, we do have our recap show where we will be talking about Joseph's show and the other 2 shows that we had this week, and introducing, of course, the great shows that we've got coming up for you. Actually, next week is Thanksgiving week, as we're all quite aware. So we've only got 1 show coming up next week, but it's going to be a great one. So do check it out, 10 o'clock Pacific, right here on Dojo Live. Thank you and take care.
Thank you all. This is great.
Thank you.